Hare Krishna. Welcome back to our online reading with Grit Labs. So, in the last episode, we have completed till chapter number 4 of canto number 1. So, today we are going to start with the chapter number 5. So, let's then get started. So, if you are having the hard copy, it is well and good. Otherwise, I will be sharing the Vedanta's website link. So this is the hard copy which I always refer. So you can always contact the nearest ISKCON center. Otherwise, you can also contact me directly. I'll be helping you in how to get the hard copy in any languages like in English, Hindi, or Odia, or any other regional languages, whatever is available. So let me share my screen. So the chapter number 5 is goes like this: Narada's instructions on Srimad Bhagavatam for Vyasadeva. Text 1. So as usual, we'll be reading only the translation and the purport. Translation. Sutta Goswami said, thus the sage among the gods, Narada, comfortably seated and apparently smiling, addressed the rishi amongst the Brahmanas, Vedavyasa. Purport. Narada was smiling because he well knew that the great sage Vedavyas and the cause of his disappointment, as he will explain gradually. Vyasadev's disappointment was due to insufficiently in presenting the signs of devotional service. Narada knew the defect, and it was confirmed by the position of Vyasa. Moving to the next verse, SB 1.5.2. Translation. Addressing Vyasadeva, the son of Parashar, Narada inquired, are you satisfied by identifying with the body or the mind as objects of self-realization? Purport. This was a hint by Narada to Vyasadeva regarding the cause of his despondency. Vyasadeva, as a descendant of Parashara, a greatly powerful sage, has the privilege of having great parentage. We should not have given Vyasadeva cause for despondency. Being a great son of a great father, he should not have identified the self with the body or the mind. Ordinary men with a poor fount of knowledge can identify the body as self or the mind as self. But Vyasadeva should not have done so. One cannot be cheerful by nature unless one is factually seated in self realization, which is transcendental to the material body and mind. So now we will move to the next verse. SB 1.5.3. Translation. Your inquiries were full and your studies were also well fulfilled, and there is no doubt that you have prepared a great and wonderful work, the Mahabharata, which is full of all kinds of Vedic sequences elaborately explained. Purport. The despondency of Vyasadeva was certainly not due to his lack of sufficient knowledge, because as a student he had fully inquired about the Vedic literatures, as a result of which the Mahabharata is compiled with full explanation of the Vedas. Moving to the next verse, SB 1.5.4. Translation. You have fully delineated the subject of impersonal Brahman as well as the knowledge derived therefrom. Why should you be despondent in spite of all this, thinking that you are undone, my dear Prabhu? The Vedanta purport, the Vedanta Sutra or Brahma Sutra compiled by Sri Vyasadeva is the full deliberation of the impersonal absolute feature, and it is accepted as the most exalted philosophical exposition in the world. It covers the subject of eternity and the methods are scholarly, so there cannot be any doubt about the transcendental scholarship of Vyasadeva. So why should he lament? Moving to the next verse, SB 1.5.5. Translation: Sri Vyasadeva said, all you have said about me is perfectly correct. Despite all this, I am not pacified. I therefore question you about the root cause of my dissatisfaction. For you are a man of unlimited knowledge, due to your being the offspring of one Brahma, who is self born without mundane father and mother. But in the material world, everyone is engrossed with the idea of identifying the body or the mind with the self. As such, all knowledge disseminated in the material world is related either with the body or with the mind, and that is the root cause of all despondencies. This is not always detected, even though one may be the greatest erudite scholar in the materialistic knowledge. It is good, therefore, to approach a personality like Narada to solve the root cause of all despondencies. Why Narada should be approached is explained below. Moving to the next verse, SB 1.5.6. Translation: My Lord, everything that is mysterious is known to you because you worship the creator and destroyer of the material world and the maintainer of the spiritual world, the original personality of Godhead, who is transcendental to the three modes of material nature. Purport: a person who is sent person engaged in the service of the Lord is the emblem of all knowledge. Such a devotee of the Lord in full perfection of devotional service is also perfect by the qualification of the personality of Godhead. As such, the eightfold perfections of mystic power, Astasiddhi, constitute very little of his godly opulence. A devotee like Narada can act wonderfully by his spiritual perfection, which every individual is trying to attain. Sri Narada is a sent person, perfect living being, although not equal to the personality of Godhead. Moving to the next verse, SB 1.5.7. Translation: Like the sun, your goodness can travel everywhere in the true world, and like the air, you can penetrate the internal region of everyone. As such, you are as good as the all pervasive super soul. Please, therefore, find out the deficiency in me, despite my being absorbed in transcendence under disciplinary regulations and vows. Purport: Transcendental realization, pious activities, worshipping the deities, charity, mercifulness, non-violence, and studying the scriptures under strict disciplinary regulations are always helpful. Moving to the next verse, SB 1.5.8. Translation: Sri Narada said, you have not actually broadcast the sublime and spotless glories of personality of the Godhead. That philosophy which doesn't satisfy the transcendental senses of the Lord is considered worthless. Purport: The eternal relation of an individual soul with the supreme soul, personality of Godhead, is constitutionally one of the being the eternal servitor of the eternal master. The Lord has expanded himself as living beings in order to accept loving service from them. And this alone can satisfy both the Lord and the living beings. Such a scholar as Vyasdeva has completed many expansions of the Vedic literatures, ending with the Vedanta philosophy, but none of them have been written directly glorifying the personality of Godhead. Dry philosophical speculation, even on a transcendental subject of the absolute, have very little attraction without directly dealing with the glorification of the Lord. The personality of Godhead is the last word in transcendental realization. The Absolute realized as impersonal Brahman or localized Supersoul Paramatma is less productive of transcendental bliss than the Supreme Personal realization of his glories. The compiler of the Vedanta Darsana is Vyasadeva himself, yet he is troubled, although he is the author. So, what sort of transcendental bliss can be derived by the readers and listeners of Vedanta, which is not explained directly by Vyasadeva, the author? Herein arises the necessity of explaining Vedanta Sutra in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam by the self same author. Moving to the next verse, SB 1.5.9. Translation: Although, great sage, you have very broadly described the four principles beginning with religious performances, you have not described the glories of the Supreme Personality, Vasudeva. Purport: The prompt diagnosis of Sri Narada is at once declared the root cause of the despondency of Vyasadeva was his deliberate avoidance of glorifying the Lord. In his various editions of Puranas, he has certainly, as a matter of course, given descriptions of the glories of the Lord Sri Krishna, but not as many as given to the religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and salvation. These four items are by far inferior to engagement in the devotional service of the Lord. Sri Vyasadeva, as the authorized scholar, knew very well this difference, and still, instead of giving more importance to the better type of engagement, namely devotional service to the Lord, he had more or less improperly used his valuable time, and thus he was despondent. From this, it is clearly indicated that no one can be pleased substantially without being engaged in the devotional service of the Lord. In the Bhagavad Gita, this fact is clearly mentioned. After liberation, which is the last item in the line of performing religiosity, etc., one is engaged in pure devotional service. This is called the stage of self realization or the Brahmabhuta stage. After attainment of the Brahmabhuta stage, one is satisfied, but satisfaction is the beginning of the transcendental bliss. One should progress by attaining neutrality and equality in the relative world. And passing this stage of equanimity, one is fixed in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. This is the instruction of the personality of Godhead in the Bhagavad Gita. The conclusion is that in order to maintain the status quo of the Brahmabhuta stage, as also to increase the devotional, the increase the degree of transcendental realization, Narada recommended to Vyasadeva that Vyasadeva should now eagerly and repeatedly describe the path of devotional service. This would cure him from gross despondency. Moving to the next verse, SB 1.5.10. Translation: those words which do not describe the glories of the Lord, who alone can sanctify the atmosphere of the whole universe, are considered by saintly persons to be like unto a place of pilgrimage for crows, since the all perfect persons are inhabitants of the transcendental abode, they do not derive any pleasure there. Purport. Crows and swans are not birds of the same feather because of their different mental attitudes. The fruitive workers or passionate men are compared to the crows, whereas the all perfect, saintly persons are compared to the swans. The crows take pleasure in places where garbage is thrown out, just as the passionate fruitive workers take pleasure in wine and women and places for gross sense pleasure. The swans do not take pleasure in the places where crews are assembled for conferences and meetings. They are instead seen in the atmosphere of natural scenic beauty, where there are transparent reservoirs of water nicely decorated with stems of lotus flowers in variegated colors of natural beauty. That is the difference between the two classes of birds. Nature has influenced different species of life with different mentalities, and it is not possible to bring them up into the same rank and file. Similarly, there are different kinds of literatures for different types of men of different mentality. Mostly the market literatures which attract men of the crows categories are literatures containing refuse remnants of sensuous topics. They are generally known as mundane talks in the relation with the gross body and subtle mind. They are full of subject matter described in decorative language, full of mundane similes and metaphorical arrangements. Yet, with all that, they do not glorify the Lord. Such poetry and prose on any subject matter is considered decoration of a dead body. Spiritually advanced men who are compared to the swans do not take pleasure in such dead literatures, which are sources of pleasure for men who are spiritually dead. These literatures in the modes of passion and ignorance are distributed under different levels, but they can hardly help the spiritual urge of the human being, and thus the swan-like spiritually advanced men have nothing to do with them. Such spiritually advanced men are called manasha, also because they always keep up the standard of transcendental voluntary service to the Lord on the spiritual plane. This completely forbids fruitive activities for gross bodily self satisfaction or subtle speculation of the material egoistic mind. Social literary men, scientists, mundane poets, theoretical philosophers, and politicians who are completely absorbed in the material advance of sense pleasure are all dolls of the material energy. They take pleasure in place where rejected subject matters are thrown, according to Swami Sridhar. This is the pleasure of the prostitute hunters. But literatures which describe the glories of the Lord are enjoyed by the Paramahansas who have grasped the essence of human activities. Moving to the next verse, SB 1.5.11. Translation, on the other hand, that literature which is full of descriptions of the transcendental glories of the name, fame, forms, pastime, etc., of the unlimited Supreme Lord is a different creation, full of transcendental words directed toward bringing about a revolution in the impious lives of the world's misdirected civilization. Such transcendental literatures, even though imperfectly composed, are heard, sung, and accepted by purified men who are thoroughly honest. Purport. It is a qualification of the great thinkers to pick up the best even from the worst. It is said that the intelligent man should pick up nectar from a stalk of poison, should accept gold even from a filthy place, should accept a good and qualified wife even from an obscure family, and should accept a good lesson even from a man or from a teacher who comes from the untouchables. These are, these are some of the ethical instructions for everyone in every place without exception. But a saint is far above the level of an ordinary man. He is always absorbed in glorifying the Supreme Lord because by broadcasting the holy name and fame of the Supreme Lord, the polluted atmosphere of the world will change. And as a result of the propagating the transcendental literatures like Srimad Bhagavatam, people will become sane in their transactions. While preparing the commentation of this particular stanza of Srimad Bhagavatam, we have a crisis before us. Our neighboring friend China has attacked the border of India with a military spirit. We have practically no business in the political field, yet we see that previously there were both China and India, and they both lived peacefully for centuries without ill feeling. The reason is that they lived those days in an atmosphere of God consciousness, and every country over the surface of the world was God fearing, pure hearted, and simple. And there was no question of political diplomacy. There is no cause of quarrel between the two countries, China and India, over land which is not very suitable for habitation. And certainly there is no cause for fighting on this issue. But due to the age of quarrel, Kali, which we have discussed, there is always chance of quarrel on slight provocation. This is due not to the issue in question, but to the polluted atmosphere of this age. Systematically, there is a propaganda by a section of people to stop glorification of the name and fame of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, there is a great need for disseminating the message of Srimad Bhagavatam all over the world. It is the duty of every responsible Indian to broadcast the traditional message of Srimad Bhagavatam throughout the world to do all the supermost good as well as to bring about the desired peace in the world. Because India has failed in her duty by neglecting the responsible work, there is so much quarrel and trouble all over the world. We are confident that if the transcendental message of Srimad Bhagavatam is received only by the leading men of the world, certainly there will be a change of heart. Naturally, the people in general will follow them. The mass of people in general are tools in the hands of the modern politicians and leaders of the people. If there is a change of heart of leaders only, certainly, there will be radical change in the atmosphere of the world. We know that our honest attempt to present this great literature conveying transcendental messages or reviving the God consciousness of people in general and re spiritualizing the world atmosphere is fraught with many difficulties. Our presenting this matter in adequate language, especially foreign language, will certainly fail, and there will be so many literary discrepancies despite our honest attempt to present it in a proper way. But we assure that with all our faults in this connection, the seriousness of the subject matter will be taken into consideration, and the leaders of society will still accept this due to its being an honest attempt to glorify the Almighty God. When there is fire in a house, the inmates of the house go out to get help from the neighbors who may be foreigners, and yet without knowing the language, the victims of the fire express themselves and the neighbors understand the need, even though not expressed in the same language. The same spirit of cooperation is needed to broadcast this transnational message of Srimad Bhagavatam throughout the polluted atmosphere of the world. After all, it is a technical science of spiritual values, and thus we are concerned with the techniques and not with the language. If the techniques of this great literature are understood by the people of the world, there will be a success. When there are too many materialistic activities by the people in general all over the world, there is no wonder that a person or a nation attacks another person or nation on slight provocation. That is the rules of this age of Kali or quarrel. The atmosphere is already polluted with corruption of all description, and everyone knows it well. There are so many ornamental literatures full of materialistic ideas of sense gratification. In many countries, there are bodies appointed by the state to detect and censor obscene literature. This means that neither the government nor the responsible leaders or the public want such literature. Yet, it is in the marketplace because the people want it for sense gratification. The people in general want to read. That is a natural instinct, but because their minds are polluted, they want such literatures. Under the circumstances, transcendental literature like Srimad Bhagavatam will not only diminish the activities of the corrupt mind of the people in general, but also it will supply food for their hankering after reading some interesting literature. In the beginning, they may not be like it because one suffering from jaundice is reluctant to take sugar candy, but we should know that sugar candy is the only remedy for jaundice. Similarly, let there be systematic propaganda for popularizing reading of the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, which will act like a sugar candy for the jaundice-like condition of sense gratification. When men have a test for this literature, the other literatures which are catering poison to society will then automatically cease. We are sure, therefore, that everyone in human society will welcome Srimad Bhagavatam, even though it is now presented with so many faults, or it is recommended by Sri Narada, who has very kindly appeared in this chapter. Moving to the next verse, SB 1.5.12 translation. Knowledge of self realization, even though free from all material affinity, does not look well if devoid of a conception of the infallible God. What then is the use of fruitive activities which are naturally painful from the very beginning and transient by nature if they are not utilized for the devotional service of the Lord? Purport. As referred to above, not only ordinary literatures devoid of the transcendental glorification of the Lord are condemned, but also Vedic literatures and speculation on the subject of impersonal Brahman when they are devoid of devotional service. When speculation on the impersonal Brahman is condemned on the ground, then what to speak of ordinary fruitive work, which is not meant to fulfill the aim of devotional service? Such speculative knowledge and fruitive work cannot lead one to the goal of perfection. Fruitive work in which all people in general are engaged is always painful, either in the beginning or the end. It can be fruitful only when the subservient to the devotional service to the Lord. In the Bhagavad Gita, also it is confirmed that the result of the such fruitive work may be offered for the service of the Lord. Otherwise, it leads to material bondage. The bona fide enjoyer of the fruitive work is the personality of Godhead, and thus, when it is engaged for the self gratification of the living being, it becomes an acute source of trouble. Moving to the next verse, SD 1.5.13. Translation. O Vyasudeva, your vision is completely perfect. Your good fame is spotless. You are firm in vow and situated in truthfulness. And thus, you can think of the pastimes of the Lord in trance for the liberation of the people in general from all material bondage. Purport. People in general have a taste for literature by instinct. They want to hear and read from the authorities something about the unknown, but the taste is exploited by the unfortunate literatures which are full of subject matter or satisfaction of the material senses. Such literatures contain different kinds of mundane poems and philosophical speculations, more or less under the influence of Maya, ending in sense gratification. These literatures, although worthless in the true sense of the term, are variously decorated to attract the attention of the less intelligent man. Thus, the attractive living entities and are more and more entangled in the material bondage without hope of liberation for thousands and thousands of generations. Sri Narada Rishi, being the best amongst the Vaishnavas, is compassionate toward such unfortunate victims of worthless literatures. And thus, he advises Sri Vyasadeva to compose transcendental literatures which is not only attractive but can also actually bring liberation from all kinds of bondage. Srila Vyasadeva or his representatives are qualified because they are rightly trained to see the things in two perspective. Srila Vyasadeva and his representatives are pure in thought due to their spiritual enlightenment, fixed in their vows due to their devotional service, and determined to deliver the fallen souls rotting in material activities. The fallen souls are very eager to receive noble information every day, and the transcendentalists like Vyasadeva or Narada can supply such eager people in general with unlimited news from the spiritual world. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that the material world is only a part of the whole creation, and that this earth is only a fragment of the whole material world. There are thousands and thousands of literary men all over the world, and they have created many, many thousands of literary works for the information of the people in general for thousands and thousands of years. Unfortunately, none of them have brought peace and tranquility on the earth. This is due to a spiritual vacuum in those literatures. Therefore, the Vedic literatures, especially the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, are specially recommended to suffering humanity to bring about the desired effect of liberation from the pangs of material civilization, which is eating the vital part of the human energy. The Bhagavad Gita is a spoken message of the Lord Himself recorded by Vyasadeva, and the Srimad Bhagavatam is a transcendental narration of the activities of the same Lord Krishna. Krishna, which alone can satisfy the hankering desires of the living being for eternal peace and liberation from miseries. Srimad Bhagavatam, therefore, is meant for all the living being all over the universe, a total liberation from all kinds of material bondage. Such transcendental narrations of the past and of the Lord can be described only by liberated souls like Vyasadeva and his bona fide representatives who are completely merged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Only to such devotees do the pastimes of the Lord and their transcendental nature become automatically manifest by dint of devotional service. No one else can either know or describe the act of the Lord, even if we speculate on the subject for many, many years. The descriptions of the Bhagavatam are so precise and accurate that whatever has been predicted in this great literature about 5,000 years ago is now exactly happening. Therefore, the vision of the author comprehends past, present, and future. Such liberated persons as Vyasadeva are perfect not only by the power of reason and wisdom, but also in oral reception, in thinking, feeling, and all other sense activities. A liberated person possesses perfect senses, and with perfect sense only can one serve the sense proprietor, Rishikesha, Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead. Srimad Bhagavatam, therefore, is the perfect description of the all perfect personality of Godhead by the all perfect personality Srila Vyasadeva, the compiler of the Vedas. So today we will stop here. So in the next session we will continue with the verse number 14. So Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki Jai, Granthraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki Jai. Hare Krishna.